Welcome to Beyond the Briefing, I'm Shannon Marvell. Highland Green Freeport has an investment of £819 million aiming to kickstart generational jobs in the Highlands. But amid the optimism, we have to ask, what has the Freeport ever done for us? From securing seed funding and landing manufacturers like Sumitomo to tapping into the North Sea renewables, there's plenty on the table. But what does it mean here and now? We're currently with Scott MacLennan, who is here to break it down with our guest, Callum McPherson, the Chief Executive of the Inverness and Cromarty Firth Green Freeport.
So you sat down with Callum McPherson, who is the Chief Executive of Green Freeport. Why did you want to meet with him, given that most people believe the Freeport is underway now?
Because the full and final confirmation of the Inverness and Cromarty Firth Green Freeport came through last month and came alongside the spending review announced by Chancellor Rachel Reeves in the House of Commons. It means that £25 million of seed funding for the Freeport to get its operations up and running will now be released after full confirmation between the Scottish and UK governments of the full business case. So, what I wanted to talk to Callum McPherson about are the questions that people most often ask me about, which is, what's happening to the jobs? What about the funding? And how long will both those things last? What good will it do the Highlands in the long run? So as the CEO of the Freeport, no one is better placed to offer an insight about what that means for the Highlands. So first, let's hear what he had to say about the release of the seed funding.
One thing worth clarifying, and this is not a straightforward thing to describe, which is, I know it's something that's difficult for people who are not involved in it to catch all the various stages, but, in some ways, last April was an important time because that's when the tax legislation was passed by the UK Parliament. And what that meant was companies like Sumitomo and others knew at that point they could progress with their factory, which they did at haste after that date in April, and knew they would be entitled to some of the tax breaks that were there. So in some ways, over the last year and a quarter, we haven't been doing nothing. We've been working towards that. But what this now allows us to do, first of all, is we've got 25 million of seed funding, which means we've got actually 10 projects identified in the area that will help unlock both the ports, some of the industrial sites, even maybe some little transport projects to allow the area to progress. So that's the first thing. And that £25 million is going to leave her in about another 60, 70 million. So overall, about another 85 million investment into the Highlands, into the Inner Firth area.
Another 85 million.
Yeah, so 25 million from us and that matched by other funding.
So £25 million in seed capital and a further £85 million from investors looking to benefit from the tax regime within the Green Freeport.
So what about the jobs that were promised during the competitive phase of the Freeport, when no one knew if it would come to the north or not?
Well, Mr. McPherson says that they are already there, at least in their hundreds, not so much in their thousands yet, as this was only formally accepted about a month ago. But there are certainly a lot of jobs already there. Here's what he had to say about that.
Talking about hundreds of jobs already.
Yeah, hundreds of jobs already. And indeed, if you're to count construction jobs, for example, there were about 450 construction jobs were happening in Ardeshir pre-Christmas. But let's just focus on the sort of permanent jobs. At the moment, we're in the hundreds, not the thousands. And really, that's the work is, if you like, we're, as you said earlier, we're at the starting line of this. And I think that's actually a really good thing because of two things. One is, many of your readers and listeners will recall that the boom that we had in Ardeshir and Nig back in the 70s and 80s. Even I remember to the tail end of it. But at that time, there's a rapid growth in the number of people to the area, and it did change the area. I would argue mainly for better, but not always for better. But in actual fact, we've got an opportunity this time to look at things like housing, infrastructure, local doctor surgeries, nursery places, sports facilities, community infrastructure, active travel, all these things, and have a sort of, as much as we can over the next year or so, build up to that. But we can expect to see big job numbers over the next 3 to 5 years. And as I say, they've already started. So for us, it's not just about bringing well-paid long-term jobs to the area. It's about doing it in a Highland way. In other words, a way that as much as we can benefits the broader area. And one of those examples would be that we're really keen, and I know that all the partners in the Freeport are really keen to use local supply chain wherever they can. The Freeport business itself, we've signed the Social Scotland Pledge. So wherever we can, if we're having external meetings or again catering or buying furniture. We use social enterprises in the area to try and do that. So we're trying to do it in a way that spreads the benefit as much as possible into the local area.
He goes on to tell us about the supply chain delivering for around 140 companies who are benefiting from the Green Freeport's presence on the shores of the Cromarty and Murray Firths.
We've done some very light touch work at the moment, and as we sit here, within an hour's drive, there's about 140 companies getting work from the Freeport. There's actually probably more than that who are coming from places like Wick and Fort William and further out past Elgin. But we just looked at those that are within about an hour of here. So there's already some companies, lots of companies that are getting work as a result of the growth within the partners within the Freeport.
And what kind of work are you talking about? I mean, I presume construction's an automatic one of those straight off the bat. Are there any others?
Absolutely. So, and as you'll know with construction, on the back of that, there's also some other construction work happening that's from out of the area, but that's just ones who've got a permanent base here. And with construction, there comes everything from cost estimators to designers to health and safety people through to catering companies. But other ones in the area will include those that are involved in the actual construction or this formation. So that includes those who are involved in metal or those who are involved in doing some of the infrastructure works that are around it as well. So at the moment, the heavy focus is around construction, but it's also those who do environmental work. Right now, we've got businesses who specialise in biodiversity, who are permanently based in the Highlands, looking at what they do with some of the sites. So it's all the way through from the professional services, through to recruitment companies, through to accountancy firms, through to the construction side of it. So the growth is starting already.
So there's been quite a lot of concern about the impact of renewables on the Highland landscape recently. How far is the Freeport involved in that?
Well, I put that to Callum McPherson. And as it turns out, he doesn't actually live that far from some of these major developments, including MacLennan, which has caused quite a lot of upset in the Bewley area. So he had a view both as a local, someone who's from the Highlands, who lives in the Highlands, and as someone who is involved in the industrial renewables sector.
So, I mean, I live maybe 3 stones throws from some of the big infrastructure in Bewley. I have done for a very long time. So I understand that there's a sort of concern about some of the onshore infrastructure that's coming. And in immediate terms, people are right to say, well, we need some clarity around that. We need some, I would say, mitigation and compensation. The one thing I would say that was a bigger concern for me as somebody who's from the Highlands is the fact for the last 3 decades, we keep hemorrhaging all our young people. We've had the last census in the last 10 years, we had another 3.7% of our working age population. So, you know, from an area that did have at one point a much bigger population, if you go further into history, and then you look at the boom we had in the 1970s and 80s, the last 3 decades have been characterised by one of the lowest wage brackets in the UK, and we keep losing our young people, our working age population. So the question, I suppose, in some ways is how do we do that whilst respecting people's right to live in the Highlands, and a beautiful place it is too. So for me, I recognise there are some concerns in the community. In some ways, what we're focused on could be the best of both worlds, because most of the infrastructure we're focused on looking at is dozens, if not hundreds of miles offshore, and we'll be using underwater cables to transmit power around. So in some ways, in terms of local communities, a diminution of what the impact might be there. But there's no denying that part of the infrastructure that's going in just now is to support the overall move towards renewables. My own view is that 2 things. One is, in the long term, fundamentally, we have an obligation to future generations to stop burning hydrocarbons. And that's what bothers my teenage kids, more than whether or not they have a nice view, without being too simplistic about it. And secondly, is that as a region, we have an opportunity to become really prosperous, and one that has a long-term prospects instead of, unfortunately, seasonal ups and downs and generational ups and downs.
And we've seen jobs in oil and gas have fluctuated. They've either increased or they've decreased in the amount of jobs available. So with the Freeport, are these jobs definitely permanent?
Well, that's a very good question. In fact, it's so good I put it to him myself when we were talking earlier. The fact of the matter is that everybody in the Highlands would recognise, particularly those who lived around Nig and Ardasir in the heydays of oil and gas, that when there was any form of downturn, the impact on employment and the local economy was almost instantaneous. And when those 2 areas in earnest stopped constructing oil rigs for the North Sea, the impact was generational. It was a significant blow to the local economy. There was a significant blow to employment and also to people's opportunities in the area. Now, in my own hometown of Dingwall, shops closed down, pubs and restaurants were empty, and some would say it's still trying to recover from that. So it's a live issue for a lot of people. Are these jobs going to be coming and going? Will they be boom and bust? This is what he had to say.
There's a fundamental difference between the offshore wind industry and what happened in the past for oil and gas. Because if you look at the amount of installations, and I've Googled this to try and get as exact number as I can, but there's about 300 oil and gas installations in the North Sea. If the majority, and even not all, but if the majority of the offshore wind installations happen that we hope out in the North Sea, there'll be over 1,000. And this is going to take decades and decades and decades just to install in the first place, let alone repowering and maintaining it. So instead of this being a boom that, might, for example, as has happened either in the construction of the hydro schemes or the oil and gas, a sort of 20-year boom, it should take 50 to 100 years just to build out. So we have an opportunity, and this is why there's been so much energy and focus and why, for example, the Sumitomo cable factory was such a great result. It's not just about this part of the world being where we take the components, put the jigsaw together and then float them off. It's about where we make the components, the manufacturing job.
That's definitely on the table these days.
Absolutely. So for example, Sumitomo is the first of, I hope, a number of manufacturers. I mean, you don't spend £350 million on a factory with a view to running it for 10 years. You do that with it being in place for some generations to come. So for us, the real prize and the reason why I hope this time, and why we believe this time it won't be boom and bust, is if we get this right, this could be work for generations to come. And maybe look at it as the counterfactual. Can you imagine our great-grandchildren having a sitting in a hostelry in Inverness enjoying a pint and saying, can you believe that we had this massive boom in the North Sea and there are now thousands of oil and thousands of offshore wind turbines and all these components, and we let all that pass as all being made in Finland and in Denmark and in Norway and in Germany and the Middle East, and here we are sitting the closest to it, but we didn't take the opportunity. I suppose in some ways that motivates me to make sure that we do get the opportunity right this time.
He's talking about generational employment. If the companies and developers involved in the Green Freeport can secure the contracts they need to, then we're looking at consistent, high-level, long-term employment for people in this area. Here's why Mr. McPherson is optimistic that the Green Freeport on the Cromarty and Moray Firths is best placed to do that of anyone in the UK.
I think there's a motivation, and I should say, by the way, one of the unique features that has been fed back to us, so this is not just a perception that we have, the public and the private sector, so the Highland Council, including all the members, and I sat for many hours in front of all the members on more than one occasion talking this through, have been supportive. Now, don't get me wrong, there's questions, and although nobody raised a hand to oppose, they probably had concerns, but overwhelmingly there's a recognition that this is possibly our last chance, or at least for many, many years, to actually try and secure our share of the energy industry in this area, rather than maybe, as has often been cited, we didn't do it normally, that we didn't secure the opportunity like they did in oil and gas for their nation's wealth. We kind of let it go away. Well, I think if we do this right, aside from the manufacturing jobs, there's real close work happening at how the community benefit comes back. We ourselves will be shortly talking about a sort of small community fund we want to distribute. But so there has been a huge push in this, because this is a competition. There's no question. If our ports and harbours in the Highlands here, and I'm going all the way from Stornoway to Kishorn, right the way around to Wick for doing the O&M, right round to all our ports and harbours, if we don't put the right foot forward to secure this, I can assure you the places in Norway and Finland and Sweden and all around Europe will. We know that there is active promotion at the moment to try and take some of the contracts that might be coming our way going elsewhere. So we can't sit back and do that, which is why the ports and the businesses and indeed the public sector are so keen to get behind this, and why to this date there are a number of ports locations around the UK and in Scotland that really wish they'd secured the Freeport status. and not necessarily had to come to the Highlands now.
You've been listening to Beyond the Briefing, the stories behind the headlines, diving deeper into the biggest local stories in the Highlands. This podcast is brought to you by Highland News and Media. It's hosted by Shannon Marvell and produced by Christopher Dixon. If you enjoyed this show, make sure to subscribe and share with others who care about local journalism.